Welcome to Dwellings, a podcast from the City of San Jose Housing Department, where we talk with thought leaders about ending homelessness, building affordable housing, and many other important housing policies. This is Season 7 of Dwellings. I'm Jeff Scott, and I'll be your host. On today's episode, we talk with Banu Song, Deputy Director of the Housing Department, as well as our guests Gia Lee from Alpha X RE Capital and Josh Burrows from Urban Catalyst. We'll discuss recent housing policy changes enacted by the City Council, including updates to the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance and some new incentive programs to help jumpstart housing development in San Jose. And with that, welcome everyone. Let's start by having you tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everyone. My name is Gia Lee, junior partner of Alpha X RE Capital. Our company is focusing on housing for all. We do the smallest as ADUs to starter homes, to middle housing, and to community development. So we started about 6 years ago, and now we're actually this year we are having more than 100 units under construction in San Jose. So we're super excited.
Great. Thank you for joining us, Gia. And Josh, why don't you introduce yourself?
Josh Burrows. I'm a partner at Urban Catalyst. We are a ground-up real estate developer here in Silicon Valley, primarily in the downtown area. We're also a fund manager, primarily tax advantage fund vehicles. Product types we do, multifamily apartments. We've also done hotels, student housing, townhomes, senior living. I was born and raised here in San Jose in the downtown area. Learned about construction and real estate through my mom. She built and ran Envision, which operated all the homeless shelters here in the South Bay area. She did everything from transitional housing to men's and women's shelters. She built the mentally ill shelter next to the SAP Center, the Opportunity Center across from Stanford, veterans housing, you name it. After college, I worked for the Swenson family, managing their downtown portfolio for about 12 years before launching Urban Catalyst with my partner, Eric. And then the last project I did before Urban Catalyst was the Grad, which is an 1,100-bed student housing high-rise in downtown.
Thank you for joining us, too. Thank you both for joining us. Banu, can you tell us what items the City Council was considering at its meeting on January 27th, which was dubbed Housing Day? I know there were some agenda items that included updates to the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance and some of our construction incentive programs.
Right. Thank you, Jeff. On that Housing Day, we brought many updates and changes to the ordinance as well as our incentive programs for market rate development. And the updates really reflect direction from the mayor and city council through the March and June budget messages. And the goal really is to strengthen the program and make it more predictable in terms of the IHO ordinance updates and support more housing development across the city in general. And so the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance was reviewed because it was originally built off on an older 2014 adapted housing impact fee program, and it transitioned to the inclusionary in 2019. So we had enough years of data to really understand how it performed, and the goal really is to modernize that ordinance based on actual developmental outcomes. So our focus for the inclusionary housing amendments were to really streamline the processes and align the requirements with market and regulatory realities, and activating portions of the ordinance that really were underutilized. And so we're really aiming to have a much more predictable and efficient system, and one that reflects the actual development patterns and encourages more units to get built. In terms of the incentive program extensions and amendments, the housing department, as we always do every 2 years, run a cost of development study. And that analysis showed us some of the challenges in the market in terms of building high-rise towers and podiums in San Jose, and really talked more about its infeasibility in terms of cost of construction. And over the past year, we've seen that the incentive program that has helped catalyze those downtown as well as other San Jose region market rate developments move forward, and has made a difference really in moving that market. So we want to continue the success of that program. And we made some modifications and improvements, as well as added some new projects and asked for extensions on that program that has proven to be so far successful. And we've had a significant number of projects move forward in 2025 compared to the year before, where we had really no market rate construction at all.
Great. Well, thank you, Bonnie. Thanks for that explanation. So we'll segue from that. And maybe, Josh, this first question might be for you. How have incentives like the construction tax waivers and parkland fee reductions helped get some of these projects to pencil out?
Yeah, great question. And going back in time, I just wanted to get some history too. And a lot was covered on that housing day with the city council. It was a lot, lots of different programs and tweaks and things like that for council to study. One of them was extending and adding to the high rise incentive for really tall buildings in the downtown, where we added a mod to that to include office to residential conversions. And there was also incentives around shorter buildings, like 8 stories and under, podium project. That's what you had mentioned, the term podium. It's anything from, let's call it 4 to 8 stories. Below 4 stories, that would be like townhome product, like 3 stories or less, 2 to 3 stories. Going back in time, I'd say on the high rise front, I've been in this cost of housing conversation over the past 15, 20 years with the city. Sneak peek, costs always go up, right? Markets change, things like that. But there's a lot of things that are in our control. I don't know if I can name a single high rise in downtown that got financed without a incentive program in place from the city. So, a takeaway I'd say is that like incentives do work. I think the incentives that we have been incremental. We're definitely not like in Austin or Seattle, even though we have higher population and a lot more dynamics going on here. We should have like 50 cranes in the air, right? In the downtown and our growth areas. But with these incentives, we do squeeze, one or two of these larger projects out, like a high rise, each cycle. And a real estate cycle might be every like 7 to 8 years. I don't know if that's a good litmus test for success, but it's definitely worked and helped get some projects that were, teetering over the line. On our Aquino project, for example, that's in downtown West. It's on one of the growth areas, the West San Carlos corridor, in between Diridon Station and the main downtown core. It was honestly this incentive program that allowed that to get over the line. And now we're under construction on close to 300 apartments there, which will house close to, 500 folks in that building. So, and it's walking distance to every amenity downtown. That was sort of our, premise at Urban Catalyst. We wanted to give folks access to all the amenities downtown has, from the arts and the theaters to restaurants and entertainment. It's walkable. We're close to all the transit. So these are definitely the places that these incentives are targeted in our growth areas around transit in the downtown. And I would say it was more than incrementally beneficial for getting, those 300 apartments under construction.
The revisions to the IHO shift some of the on-site affordability to higher AMI levels. So my question for you, Gia, is why was providing deeper affordability so challenging? And do you think by focusing on higher AMI ranges, we'll see more inclusionary housing units get built?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I think I can start with from our experience. I think especially we're doing a lot of smaller infill projects. I think the largest project we do in San Jose is probably up to 60 units. So with us, for example, if we have a project like 20 units, then by providing inclusionary housing based on the city's requirement, we're providing only like 2 or 3 units. So that's actually really not cost effective, and also because we doesn't have the economics of scales, and then we have to pay all the administrative and regulatory fee on all those units, managing all those units. So it's actually adding a lot of burden on it. And with the deeper affordability, because we have such thin margin When you're doing a smaller project, you have to go through everything. Same, it's very similar to the larger development. I've prior to Alpha X, I've actually worked for a larger developer, and as very focusing on downtown high rises in the past decades. So that's where we have the economics of scales to manage all those units or even pay a fee at the time. But for Alpha X, we're very focused on providing the actual units instead of paying a fee. So by providing those units and then with that deeper affordability, it really makes the project financially feasible. So sometimes when we look at the deal, we underwrite it, we decide not to proceed because of the deeper affordability arrangement. So for the burden on the smaller projects really showing up, I think by changing it to a higher affordability level is really help a project moving forward. So previously, for example, under the old 10 units rule, we were constantly hitting what I called the compliance cliff. So the moment we proposed an 11th unit, the project saddled with the same administrative and regulatory weight, same as 300 units steel tower. So for the smaller scale build, all the fixed costs I mentioned earlier is a really represent a much higher percentage of the budget. And also, I think this change also align with what we really focus is the state level housing policy as well, especially the Starter Home Revitalization Act. So the state has been very clear that we need to incentivize the middle housing starter home to bridge the gap in our market. I think San Jose did a great job updating this. This is really encouraging for a small and mid-sized developer and builder to build more housing in San Jose.
I also want to add from the mayor's and council's direction from the March and June budget message, we were directed to shift the AMI targets towards workforce range. So roughly between 60 to 120% AMI, because that's what we've actually seen developers produce. So when we looked at the last 5 years data, the projects that were completed, more than half of them were built in terms of the inclusionary units were between 60% area median income to 110% area median income. And few projects paid an in lieu fee. So really what we wanted to do was reflect what the market was showing and really follow the council's direction in moving towards more of workforce range.
One of the changes approved by the city council that you guys are making reference to is the fact that in the past, projects that had 10 or more units would be subject to some of these rules and regulations. But then this year, the city council changed that. And so now projects have to have 20 units or more in order to have to abide by some of these rules and regulations. And for some of these smaller developments that are under 20 units, they are not bound by these same regulations. Gia, is that correct?
That's correct. That's exactly what I references earlier.
Yeah, and that's a really important part of the market to deliver to, you know. And, you know, as Gia was saying, the margins on these projects are incredibly thin, right? And especially on the production side, that the city has raw data, right? How many units did we deliver? We had no construction starts in 2024. So that's where you can analyze how the policy has been working or not working and use data, raw data, and make tweaks to try and get stuff out of the ground. You know, we have a very dynamic environment here in Silicon Valley. San Jose has been a leader in housing production compared to our peers, but we still have to build enough housing. I look at these policies and tweaking them as sort of an anti-displacement policy in that we have a certain amount of, let's call it 1970s, 80s, 90s housing product in San Jose that has traditionally housed our essential workers. As we stalled on producing market rate housing, you know, I have friends who own these types of buildings, and it's been interesting to see them talk about how the applicant pool has changed. And this is directly correlated to us not producing enough market rate housing for, let's call it the tech worker, if you want to broad brush it. If you don't produce the housing for the tech worker, they are going to get a roof over their head and they start infiltrating this secondary market, which pushes out our essential workers. So it's very critical we produce more than an ample amount of market rate housing to keep, all the naturally affordable supply intact. And I think that's really important in the long run. A lot of this is my personal opinion, goes back to like Prop 13. And that when that went into place, that really restricted the amount of property tax dollars that cities relied on to pay for things, right? Like new parks, or the county to build new schools, have funds to spend on affordable housing and things like that. We also had the redevelopment agencies go away about a decade ago that used to fund an incredible amount of affordable housing here. Over time, these cities have looked at different ways to get additional funding and to pay for these things that they frankly don't have the money to pay for. And market rate housing is where those taxes went to try and collect from to provide those community benefits and things like that. There is a tipping point, though, where things get too expensive and you tax housing too much, and then no housing gets built. So it's kind of like a catch-22. So I think that's kind of like what we're dealing with today, and what the city and the housing department, frankly, has been working with the data to try and figure out where's that middle ground where, you can right size fees and create different incentives to try and balance the whole thing out.
Yeah, I totally echo what Josh just said. And just adding to that, because there are certain things that we can control and certain things that we cannot control. So there's a land cost that keep going up, and then construction costs keep going up. It's not going down anytime in the future. Previously, I worked on a high rises that has been entitled, but couldn't be able to get built because of pandemic. But the market we cannot control as well. So that's where I think city really take the lead on doing all the data, collecting all the data and doing all the study to make this pivot toward producing more housing. So that's where we've seen a lot of activities happening this year. So super excited.
Are you finding some of the same challenges that you're facing here in San Jose and Silicon Valley throughout the entire state?
Yeah, so we've been focusing on the Orange County, the SoCal market as well. So we have a small office over there. I think so in Southern California is a very diverse area. So some city of Los Angeles are pretty for example, city of Los Angeles, city of San Diego, they're pretty pro housing and pretty active on encourage housing. But for a lot of cities, some of the city are not in the core area. They're historically more conservative. It's really hard to produce new housing activities. There, a lot of city are not fully, but they're not adopting the new state laws, or they're not opt in. For example, the city of San Jose, of course, you're the first one here in the Bay Area doing the AB 1033, which is for the listener is the ADU condo conversion, allowing ADU to sold separately. So city of San Jose adopted. I think in a lot of area in the Southern California, only certain city adopted, and I think especially with the city in the eastern part of Los Angeles, some of the city are really challenge for us to do entitlement and especially combining with the state law. They're not that acceptive to those new state laws and coming to their neighborhood.
Josh, I believe you have some experience with some conversions, kind of commercial or business to residential conversions. Do you, and I know the one of the things that the city council here in San Jose has approved is an expansion of the downtown residential incentive program to include commercial to residential conversion. So do you think this is going to result in us producing more housing downtown based on vacancy trends and rental trends and other things you've seen in the industry?
I've looked at a lot of potential deals to do conversions, highly site dependent. It has to be like certain dimensions to make it work. Our residential buildings have certain, footprints and dimensions, right? You have a row of units, a hallway, another row of units, things like that. You want windows. So, I mean, I don't think it's going to be like an outrageously huge windfall of units. However, there's a handful of projects and existing buildings that are either blighted or have been vacant for many years that are good candidates structurally and from a design perspective. There was a groundbreaking last week super exciting with West Bank downtown and the conversion of the Bank of Italy historic tower. So it's very site dependent. Again, so I don't think it's going to produce like a million housing units, but for those certain candidates, I think it's going to be great. Bank of Italy is going to be amazing. There's another building downtown, 152 North 3rd at St. James Park, which is like a 10-story, that red brick building. I think that's a really good candidate as well. So I thought it was a really good incentive program the city put in place.
Another change the City Council made was to remove the highest AMI ban for on-site inclusionary housing units, which had been at 110% AMI. I believe the City Council felt it imposed an unnecessary administrative burden on many rental properties that were already leasing at or above market rates. Josh, do you think it was a good idea for the City Council to get rid of the requirement at that AMI band?
I mean, I think in general, anytime you have inclusionary, there's going to be some sort of paperwork and administrative burden on the property manager. From a high level, if we can remove red tape, make it easier to rent units out, especially units due to red tape that maybe would sit vacant, frankly, I think that's a benefit. So we want to get folks indoors into housing. And if we can remove some more bureaucratic type stuff to right size that, I think that's a good idea.
And for both you, Gia, and for Josh, a question that goes beyond the financial terms, beyond the numbers. The city, I think, is introducing and is continuing to look at introducing administrative tools, visual guides, other sorts of templates and things that are intended to make the pre-development process more predictable and faster and easier. Can you tell us how much do those sorts of tools and guidance from the city help make things a little bit more predictable and a little bit more efficient for you on your end?
I think with those tools will be actually very helpful. I think from two perspectives. One, the perspective is actually giving us more certainty during the land acquisition period. I think with all the fee, because we're doing underwriting at the beginning, so we with all the tools we can get to know how much fee we're going to be paying. That'll be really helpful. And with all the templates that you mentioned earlier, I think that will expedite the process. And then we know what kind of agreement we can reference. And then with the templates ready, then it's actually expedite the entire process, which is decrease our holding costs. Right now, as everyone knows, the interest rate and the whole cost of holding the property is extremely high, no matter is the equity level or the debt. So for us, saving even a day actually help us save a lot of money and then make the project more feasible.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, at the end of the day, what we do is we analyze risk, and real estate's an alternative investment, right? Like folks invest in stocks or they invest in bonds or startup, whatever they might invest in. Real estate's an alternative to that. And so you're trying to put things into a box, right? Package it up. And so if there's ways and tools the city can implement to try and have stuff be extremely clear, doesn't move or change throughout the process, the more stability you can have in that, the better we can put it in the box, package it, and we're pitching investors who don't live here on why they should invest their money into San Jose, right, and build housing and stuff like that. The more clarity and simplicity, the better for sure.
Before some of these changes were made by the city council, we had very limited construction activity, especially market rate construction housing activity. And so I want to go back and revisit that. And maybe, Josh, this might be a question for you, but it's my understanding that in the city council's actions on in January of this year, they extended the deadline for the multifamily housing incentive program, and they also increased the capacity. In other words, the number of units that could be covered by that incentive program. Can you tell us from your perspective? Do you think this deadline extension and the increased capacity that's been allowed by the city council, do you think that's going to help you attract more investment, secure more institutional capital? Do you think it's going to generally be a net positive for you?
When the program was first put into place, we had a certain amount of existing entitled projects that the community and the city is approved, and they're just sitting there rotting, right? The initial program for that multifamily housing incentive program unlocked a couple thousand of those units. So there's almost like immediate feedback as to like, this was a good idea. I think piggybacking on that, extending it is a great thing. There's only a certain amount of political will for these types of things. And so there's typically a timeline and a deadline and things like that. where programs expire. Personally, I think our market rate housing crisis is so profound, and this goes back to my displacement item with our naturally affordable housing stock, that something like this should probably be a permanent program with no end date. That's also no end date is also another version of certainty when you're, talking to investors about why they should invest here. This will probably come back in another year and, a couple years. When we have to, go look at our RENA goals, how much housing have we actually delivered with state requirements and things like that. Maybe in a different podcast, we can talk about builder's remedy and the implications of not producing enough market rate housing and our fair share for that matter. Definitely some push-pull with these programs and these deadlines and timelines. Ultimately, we need to build as much housing as we can. I think it'll help affect all income levels.
Gia, can you talk about other innovative tools or programs that you think will help get more housing built in San Jose?
I probably wanted to highlight another program that we recently encountered with the housing department. I think the surplus credit exchange program. So basically, to explain in a plain language, when you have a project that requires inclusionary housing production, you can actually using a credit from another site that you overproduce to replace, to use that as a credit so you can use on your project, the original project. With that, we're actually experimenting that. So we have a 100% affordable housing project that we're under entitlement right now. And then we have another market rate product. We're trying to use some of the credit of the 100% affordable housing project towards the market rate housing. So we actually even introduced this program to other cities. We think it's a pioneer program. This exchange really allows to lean on the economics of scales. Even we're very proud of construction and building and design, but we're not affordable housing operators. We're not affordable housing builders yet. So we're hoping that with this kind of a flexible exchange is really helping us to produce more market rate, and at the same time, the city can still get the inclusionary housing that needed for the community.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Gia. Yeah, just out of curiosity, are the some of the other smaller cities around here, are they open to that idea of this
They
surplus
actually, yeah,
coverage?
yeah. Thank you for asking that. So they actually asked us to send some of the memos that we had from San Jose to them so it can take a look. So they're actually started to explore different options for inclusionary housing. So they can also encourage more housing production. But of course, City of San Jose is a pioneer for this one, and thanks for the housing staff helping us to. Especially some of the 100% affordable builder, they do produce because of the economic scales, they can get state funding, they can also get other fundings and or have investors, institutional investors to invest in the project. By doing that, they're really encouraging more housing production on both market rate and inclusion housing side.
That was a dormant section of the ordinance, allowing the developers to earn and transfer the credits when they produce more affordable units than was required. So we've activated that section of the ordinance and worked on the technical details of how it's going to function. And we're almost there in terms of implementation. We're looking at our first projects now. There are projects where there's market rate construction on a site, and there's a individual, for example, affordable housing building that they're building as a part of their inclusionary obligation. And because it's a standalone building, majority of the time, the units that building produces is more than the minimum. And so that's where you would see a good example of surplus credits that the developer can use towards another future development, or they can exchange with another developer under this program.
Yeah, I'm looking at a large site to do like townhomes and maybe also doing like a standalone affordable project on the same site for the inclusionary portion. However, the amount of units being produced on the affordable would be like 30% units, which is like way more than what's required. And so having this actual like, formal credit program where the city can create a marketplace for this, I think ultimately is gonna make for a lot more housing produced in the long run.
I just wanted to add, we encourage feedback further about these programs as they, to me, are still evolving. And so I look forward to seeing how they work out in terms of new construction coming our way and conversions, as well as the surplus credit program. So these are living programs that constantly need updates and improvements. So we look forward to a lot more feedback from all the developers this year.
This has been a very enlightening conversation. And before we wrap up, I don't know if either one of you have some final words or some thoughts in general about these incentive programs and changes to the IHO that you want to share that maybe I haven't asked you about.
Jeff, we forgot to talk about AI. Don't we always have to talk about AI on any podcast these days?
Hey, Josh, if you want to talk about AI, fire away. Do you have a comment to make about how it might play into the development of housing, affordable housing or otherwise?
I'm just gonna plant a seed and go over timeline when we talked about managing risk. There's a land acquisition stage, right? This is just, let's say we're gonna build a apartment building, affordable or market rate. Let's say the entitlement process, that's where the city approves like your exterior design, how many units, how high is it, ingress, egress, that kind of stuff. Let's say that takes 12 to 16 months, something like that. And then after that, you transition over to the building department, and that's like another 12-month or so process. You create your construction blueprints, you process it through the city, there's back and forth. These are all like the guts of the building. And then it takes 2 years to build your project. And so it's a very long time managing risk to actually deliver units to the market. I think AI is going to play a role where perhaps like AI can be doing the plan check, right? So it downloads the California Building Code, it downloads your plans. And instead of like a 12-month process to get to building permit, where you can actually break ground on housing production, maybe it takes 10 days. I don't know. Same thing with back and forth with, design review for your entitlement. Maybe that gets truncated through that. These are things I think are on the horizon, and something that could be a huge windfall for housing production in the state.
That does sound very exciting. The possibilities there for housing is quite apparent. So thanks for mentioning that. So to all of you, to Gia, to Banu, and to Josh, thank you for joining us today. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, found it very enlightening. I would say to Gia and Josh, and to any other developers who may be listening, good luck utilizing all the new tools, incentives and the changes to the IHO that have been enacted. Hopefully, we'll be able to see significant increases in the production of all types of housing at all income levels in the years ahead, thanks to these changes. So again, thank you all very much. Thank you, Gia, Josh, and Banu, for joining us on today's episode. Thanks for listening to Dwellings, the City of San Jose Housing Department podcast. Our theme music is Speed City, composed and performed by Attain Charles. Thanks to San Jose Jazz for letting us use their music. If you like the show, please subscribe and share with your friends and family. If you're looking for more ways to help address housing and homelessness issues in San Jose, please check out the show notes. You can follow the Housing Department on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SJ City Housing. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode, please send them to housingcoms@sanjoseca.gov. The artwork on our website was created by Chelsea Palacio. Dwellings is produced by me, Jeff Scott, and Jose Chavez of the Housing Department.